Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Speaker Stories. It's been a while since we've done one of these just due to various scheduling conflicts and such, but we're happy to be back here. I've got Rand Gardner with me today. Rand is our October speaker, and just as a reminder, Rand will be speaking downtown at the Wynkoop Brewery on October 29th. That's a Tuesday. You can join us in person at 11:30 for the talk, or you can join us via Zoom remotely if that works for you. But go to RMS SEPM to check out the registration for that. Rand, thanks so much for being here today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited to, I'm surprised anybody wants to hear what I have to say. So I'm excited to bring it to the table and get some good discussion and input.
That's great. Yeah, we're really we're happy to have you. Let's start at the beginning. So where did you grow up, and what part of the world?
I grew up in the oil patch, mostly in Texas. My parents were in the oil business. My dad was a reservoir engineer. And so growing up, I always heard stories around the dinner table about the oil field and dual phase fluid flow and stuff like that. That was what he's always trying to talk to us about, my brothers and I. And so that's where I grew up, kind of in that setting, hopping around most kind of oil towns like that. And so I always was aware of the business and was aware that geology was a thing. And so that was kind of my upbringing with that. I was always been aware of the oil business specifically and geology kind of vaguely within that.
Okay, so if you as a parent and a geologist and myself, I always kind of bore my children and my wife with geology, but with the intent of trying to groom them into the geology world. So how did you get with a reservoir engineer parent? How did you get into geology? How did that transpire?
I'll be honest, it really turned me off to it because, my dad was always, kind of extolling the virtues of the oil business and how it's necessary for society. And, that's probably true. But I wanted to do something else with my life. So when I went to college, I got into a business. It was an accounting major. I did that for 2 years. And maybe I guess reality hit one day when my roommate, I got a new roommate, and he was a geology major. And he was always leaving for the field because I was going to school in Utah. There's lots of outcrops nearby. I guess, they would just go out to nearby outcrops as part of their normal kind of coursework. And so I got a little jealous because I was just doing my credits and debits homework, and it was pretty boring, to be honest. And he was always doing fun stuff. And so I took the historical geology class that next semester with him. And, you learned about dinosaurs and fossils and, all the exciting parts about geology that people kind of think of, volcanoes and things like that. And so you learn that. And I was like, man, it reminded me, when I was a kid, when I liked that kind of stuff. And then also I kind of knew in the back of my mind, I can make a living doing this in the oil business. And so after that, I was pretty much hooked. I took that class. I told my dad about it. And then he called one of his buddies, and they had a summer job for me lined up. And so I just hopped right back in the oil field, went down to South Texas, and did some stuff out there. And then I just switched after that. I resisted it at first, but so having a parent in it, I think they were a little overbearing, probably because I didn't want to have anything to do with it. And so both my brothers became engineers, not in the oil business. And so but I came crawling back, eventually. So I think as a parent, if you want to instill that in your kids, I wouldn't be too forceful because I'd hear about it every day, the oil business. And so maybe just honing in on those exciting parts like, dinosaurs and fossils and things like that kids can really relate with. And I've seen the same with my own kids. I take them to Dinosaur Ridge or someplace around here, their eyes light up. But if I ever try to tell them where like the natural gas we cook with comes from, they don't care. It's like the last thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I've had that similar experience. So when you did your summer job, were you mudlogging on the rig, like in the oil field, or were you doing a geology job?
It was sort of geology related. They got me a job as kind of a surveyor. So some small company had just made a big purchase, and they weren't sure exactly where all the wellheads were and what infrastructure was there on the pipelines. And some of these fields in South Texas have been around for 100 years. And so
Yeah.
my job was to go around with a GPS, flag where these wells were, make some notes, take some pictures, and put together this database. And so I was able to finish it faster than, the end of the summer. And I got a hold of one of the geologists in the office. I said, hey, I'd like to get some geology experience. And he set me up with, an account to log in and like download tops and make my own picks and look at well logs and stuff. So I kind of got my foot in the door that way, actually doing some subsurface interpretation experience, after I finished the, kind of mundane surface work. And so it was kind of fun to be able to do that and actually get an idea for what a geologist might actually do.
Yeah, and that's a pretty big, that's pretty early in your career to kind of have that understanding of the subsurface work, especially. And surveying sounds cool too, just to be out there. But that's a pretty good jump on it. So that must have been a good kickstart for your
It
career.
helped because it gave me something to talk about when the recruiters would come around. So I think I was a junior that year. I'd already been in college a couple of years. And so I did that, got another internship somewhere else the next year, and then just went to grad school. And the rest. It's typical pathway after that. But it helped to get into it early and know what I wanted
Yeah.
instead of maybe go to grad school and then look at the salaries and decide oil is the one I
Yeah.
wanted to do. I knew that from the start. So I started trying to get oil experience early on.
Yeah. Well, that's really cool. So what kind of work did you do for graduate school?
So I had an outcrop-based thesis in West Texas looking at the OAE2 interval in some outcrops near Del Rio, Texas. So what people know is the Eagle Ford, that age rock, Sedimentary and Turonian. And so there's some nice exposed outcrops right on the border. And so I did a bunch of measured sections, did some comparative kind of studies across these outcrops, and just put together sort of a depositional model for how quickly some of the sedimentary features change over a certain distance. I guess the scale of a lateral well, over a mile or less. How can you expect some of these little tiny waveforms or foraminifera pack stones that will form within the organic rich stuff to be continuous or break up into discrete little bodies? And so I was able to sort of document that, where you wouldn't be able to do that with just core or just logs. It's too fine a scale. So that's what I did for my thesis work at Texas A&M.
Was the variability that you saw, was that surprising? Were you shocked by that at all? I would imagine it's more than we'd expect, but
Yeah, I was surprised. I just assumed, because when you look at like a photograph of the outcrop, it all looks like layer cake, for miles. And as I went down the canyon and multiple, detailed measured sections, you start to see, as you trace individual beds, it could go from an isopachus sort of bed. It would start to get kind of undulatory and then break up into individual lenses as the source, in this case, I guess, as 4AM tests became scarce or was at the edge of whatever currents or something that were reworking those, and it would just be completely gone. And so over a short period, those beds come and go quite a bit. And I just always assumed it would be much more layer cake than that. You think of as a quiescent environment, stuff just raining down. There's actually a lot of reworking with bottom currents, and so there was quite a bit of lateral change. And I guess the implication would be that you get this real brittle lithology that comes and goes, but the constant was the, I guess, less brittle stuff, that the mudstones were always there, kind of raining out of suspension. But then these other things would come and go quite a bit. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and it's and I know in our company, we drill 2 mile laterals, and the engineers expect things to stay consistent along that, and that's sometimes the case, but not always. So that's a good lesson. I might have to look that up and show them your work.
Sure. Yeah, I believe it. Yeah, I think it's probably a lot like a lot of things in geology. If you look hard enough, you'll notice there's just a lot more variability than you'd expect, because people haven't looked hard enough yet. So,
Yeah, that's
yeah.
a good lesson. So then, and I saw a couple, like when I was looking at your background, a couple of summer internships, maybe it was that kind of after graduate school or during graduate school. Is that kind of how you got your foot in the door for your job?
Yeah, yeah, I had to rely on nepotism to get my foot in the door initially. My dad would, when I was in college, I used to participate in like boxing. I used to be like a semi-professional boxer, and so I would do these local fights, and my dad would send the videos to all of his engineering buddies. And so every time I had a new fight, it'd go on YouTube. He'd send it out, and so when I told him I was going to go into geology, he said, "Hey, I'll hook you up with something." So one of his buddies that was like some kind of drilling manager, he's the one who found me that first internship and said, "Hey, we'll just make up a job for him. Go out and survey these wells." So that got me in the door. And once I had a little experience under the belt, then I could legitimately get some other internships. Like they're small companies. Although St. Mary's, I got an internship there. They're mid-size, sort of independent. And so yeah, that's really when I guess I really started to cut my teeth on actual, petroleum geology problems, look at logs, map things out, come up with some kind of answer that they're looking for. And, to the extent that you can as an intern, I guess. So that definitely got my foot in the door and opened the door. And that was during grad school. I had a couple more internships, and then was lucky enough to get a job offer from BP. So I started working there at BP after that.
Okay,
Full time.
What were you doing at BP? Where did they start you at?
So they started me out in exploration in the Western Hemisphere group. So we were, if you can imagine, 2012, 13, 14, this is big time for, a lot of these shale plays. Everybody wanted part of, something. And so Mexico was about to open. They were about to change their constitution. It's around 2013 or so, to allow foreign investment for the first time in like 70 years since they'd nationalized, since Pemex. So they assigned me to Mexico. So I went down there and I did some work with Pemex at their facilities describing core. We took them to some outcrops. The outcrops I did my thesis on, I took a huge group of Pemex out there. We tranched around out there. So we had this kind of data sharing thing that went on for about a year. And that was kind of one of my main jobs. Was they called it a technical liaison. So my boss heard me speaking with one of my coworkers, and he said, "Hey, I heard you speak in Spanish. You're going to be our technical liaison with Pemex." And I was like, "Well, I wasn't actually speaking Spanish. Like I didn't speak any Spanish, but this lady was Brazilian. And when I was a young man, I lived in, East Africa for 2 years in Mozambique, where they speak Portuguese. So I was just chatting with her, and because he heard that, and to him it was the same, and I explained it was different, and he didn't care. He's like, "Whatever, it's close enough." So I muddied my way through that. It was not pretty, but we managed to communicate on some level and make this partnership with Pemex. And it wasn't like we came up with some kind of exclusive agreement after that, but we did sign some kind of a data sharing agreement at the end of this series of meetings we had together, and worked together on some onshore evaluation in Mexico. And so that was what the job pretty much was from until about 2014, was doing these basin analyses for potential of these unconventional. So northern Mexico, obviously Eagle Ford, maybe some Haynesville equivalent stuff goes over there. And then I helped out on some other stuff, to the extent that like the greenest person on the team could. They were looking at Vaca Muerta at the time. Obviously, the Canadian Bakken was big on the radar at the time. So those are the things I kind of focused on. And sometimes some international projects would come across that they wanted someone to, make a 1D model for or something. And so I'd help out on, there's a little bit in the Bajanov, and I forget what that shale was called in Poland. They really hyped it up, but it never turned out to be anything.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
yeah, it was, it ended up not being much of a play, but so that's what they had me doing at BP until probably the end of 2014. And then I got transferred to the Gulf of Mexico deep water team. Yeah.
So how kind of going back to like the liaison between BP and Pemex, how did you find working with another country's oil companies? I have no experience with that. What kind of contrasts or differences did you notice between?
Yeah, it was definitely different. Because it's nationalized, it felt a lot more like it had a hierarchy, or almost like a military thing. Like they really respected the rank of the people. If like the person that was like the supervisor said something, everybody else like hushed down. It wasn't like a lot of discussion back and forth. Whereas I feel like if you took your boss to go look at a core or something, there'd be a lot of back and forth, and anybody's observation is as legitimate as anybody else's. If you're a geologist, you can observe something and comment on it and
Yeah.
think about the possibilities. And I noticed there's a lot more kind of top down, this is the way it is kind of thing there. And maybe that's a product of it being a nationalized oil company, or maybe their culture is a different kind of dynamic between bosses and employees. So that's the one thing I noticed that was interesting. Other than that, they were they were really interested in collaborating with outside people because they'd been kind of cloistered for so long. And I think even 10 years later, they're still kind of like that. I've seen that they've people from Pemex will come to international meetings. They're starting to put out a lot more publications, whereas before I think they kept it a lot closer to their chest. But now they have partners in the offshore and the onshore, and so it's probably changing quite a bit now. But and they're very, very proud of what they had, for good reason. They were the experts in their stuff for so long, the only ones working it. And so they really knew the details of all these plays and how they worked. And so that really came through in the discussions and the core things that we did together. We went and looked at some outcrops together in the Sierra Madre. They really were excellent technically, and world-class experts. And they took their job very seriously. I was always kind of self deprecating, and they never were. They were always extremely serious. And so it was really interesting to work with them.
Yeah, what a fun experience. That's really cool. And so after BP, did you go to Total after that? Is that
Yeah,
right?
that's right. They had some layoffs, and they ran me off in 2016 or so. So I was fortunate to find a job at Total. Total had just made an entry into the Gulf of Mexico with their North Platte partnership with Cobalt, and so they were looking for people with Gulf of Mexico experience and early career geologists. And I happened to, I guess, fit that description. And so they took me on, and I worked there in the Gulf of Mexico for, I guess, maybe a year and a half. And then they switched me over to the Suriname Guyana team. They had a big exploration effort down there after the Liza discovery by Exxon. That really picked up. And so it was still deep water environment. So, a lot of the same seismic interpretation, stuff transfers over. And it's actually the seismic in Guyana and Suriname is a lot better because you don't have salt. It's not the complicated kind of situation. The basin history, I feel like, is a lot more straightforward. So by that time, I'd gotten deep into basin modeling. I would still map out prospects, but I'd kind of become a petroleum systems person by that point. So I would make models of the prospects and try to de-risk the charge or timing or something like that, or product type. And so that's pretty much what I was doing at Total, is a lot of petroleum system stuff and prospect generation.
Okay, cool. And then after that, you moved to the USGS. Is that correct?
That's right. In 2021, my wife gave me an ultimatum because I was spending a lot of time, watching wells or traveling for stuff. And so she said I needed to cut back a little bit. You know how it is in the oil business. Sometimes you can't cut back, especially during an exploration campaign. So I saw a USGS job posted in Denver, and I thought that sounds a lot, more fun than Houston. So I applied and was fortunate to get the job, and came here in January 2021, the office here in Denver.
Yeah, and I remember asking Jason Flom about this too. It was like, how, is there any advice for somebody that might be applying to, not me, but somebody might be applying to the USGS, and how, like, any tips and tricks on getting in there? Because it sure seemed complicated when I was looking several years ago, right?
Yeah, they don't make it easy, and there's not a lot of oil and gas specific stuff in there. So tips and tricks, I'd say one thing I did was I remember during my interview, I probably layered it on too thick, but I kind of made the case. I was like, hey, I work in the oil business, and we do a lot of good technical stuff, but sometimes your boss pressures you to make a prospect look bigger than it is so it can get drilled. And I'm really hoping a place like the USGS, you could just stick to pure science and just be really proud and honest about what you're doing, and not have to fudge the numbers. And I didn't know how that was going to go over, but they seemed to really eat it up. They're like, yeah, we really are, honest and stuff. And so maybe just yeah, the right mix of praise and mixing with what should be true, I guess. But I guess the biggest obstacle is there being a position open, obviously. And so you'll see a ton of jobs at the USGS, but a lot of them are for like seismic hazards or stuff, which it might be hard to transfer oil and gas skills to some of these jobs that I see posted. So I guess get to know somebody like Jason or me, and when the jobs come up, say that you're interested, so we can tell you when they come up, because that's probably the biggest one, is have your resume in. And what's good about the government is, at least it's pretty egalitarian in terms of hiring. Like, if you're qualified, then someone's going to be able to see your CV, and especially if you have oil and gas experience, that goes a long way in this particular group that we're in. So, and then one other thing, there are some rules in the government. There's like some specific information they want on your resume, like month and year and month of your time at each place. Like some people will just say like 2005 to 2011, I was at this thing.
Oh,
Well, they're really picky about that. And so now that I'm a supervisor and I have to go through these hoops to hire people, I realize that you're not going to get through the HR screening to even have somebody like me or Jason or an actual geologist look and really appreciate your resume. Most people probably get stuck at this HR level where a non-geologist is going to decide if you're qualified for this geologist job. And so they're going to look at this thing and say like, hey, I planned all these lateral wells or did this thing. They're not going to understand like the petrophysical study that you did. It's not going to make any sense to them. You need to make it like drop dead, like clear, like the questions in the job that your thing matches up one for one. Your resume addresses all those things. So they're going to have some maybe poorly worded thing about what the job description is. Just make sure your resume is exactly that. And then once you're in there and you can actually talk to somebody, like have an interview, then they're going to appreciate, the details of, this basin analysis you did or something. But the HR person has no idea what most of the words mean. So they're going to get confused and be like, hey, this guy's talking about his well log interpretation, but this job is for resource assessments. And they're not going to realize that they're the same thing, that they're intertwined. And so I'd say that's the big one is just really tailor your resume. If you really want a job at the USGS, tailor your resume exactly to the job description. Maybe you have to leave out some of the finer details of, your exploits, but you'll be able to explain that all later in an interview or something. Just make sure it really matches, because we go through this huge bureaucracy of HR people who see your resume first. And if they don't check off the boxes, it's never going to come to a subject matter expert who actually knows something about geology.
That's the first line of defense. So that's good for anybody out there watching this that might be applying for a USGS job in the future. Take note of this. That's great advice. Thank you. And then as you look at kind of how your career has progressed, what do you think? I always have kind of a hard time asking this question because I don't know if it comes out right, but what do you think makes a good mentor? Or do you have any kind of mentors in your past that have helped you? And because I mean, I think the crux of it is that we're all mentors at some level, right? And like, how do we, what benefited you, and how do we pass that on to the people around us and help people out in the industry? Because like you said, even with the USGS, it seems like more and more geology jobs require knowing somebody and having somebody help you along. So that's kind of a long-winded non-question, but love
Yeah,
to.
yeah, I agree with you. So I think for me, when I think back, the people that had the most influence on me and helped me the most is someone sat me down and actually showed me how to do some skill or some practical thing. Because a lot of people are willing to go take you out for a coffee and talk to you about some big overarching career thing. But I feel like what helps me the most is actually learning a useful skill, and then that helped me quite a bit get the job that I wanted because I happen to have that skill. And so whenever if I'm going to collaborate with someone now, I like to just find some technical thing that we can work on together, and hopefully I learn a skill along the way that I didn't have before, and then I come out of it having learned something, and hopefully they learn something too. And
Yeah.
so I guess maybe that'd be the thing in a mentor. Think about the technical side more than because people will see the guy like, hey, that guy's the supervisor, he's the VP of exploration, and I'd sure like to sit down with him and get his career advice. Well, I'm sure they'll give you good career advice, but in the short term, I feel like you need like practical job skills to do things. And so that's what I like to focus on. And you can see by my office, it's not like I'm rolling in it here, so maybe it's not the best advice if just getting a promotion is what you're after. But I just like to learn new skills and keep myself interested and engaged in geology.
Well, I think that's great advice. That's really, really cool to hear your perspective. Cool. All right. How about favorite outcrop, fossil, rock, mineral? What you got any that come to mind?
Favorite outcrop. Well, I guess I'll combine favorite outcrop and fossil. So in my field area in West Texas, and I'll won't be too descriptive so no one can go out there and kind of sequester this thing away. At the bottom of the riverbed, I found a fossil, and I didn't know what it was at first. It looked like an interesting kind of linear feature, and I thought it almost looked like the treads of a tire. And I thought, hey, no one could have got even an ATV down this canyon. It's so remote. And as I moved the rocks away, poured water on it, kind of scraped off the stuff, I realized wasn't a tire track. It was a flipper. And the digits of the fingers in some of these like aquatic reptiles are really long. They might have like 15 joints, and we only have 3 joints. And so it was this long flipper, like several feet long and probably this wide. And I thought it was a tire track, but it was actually a flipper. And as I uncovered more, I found vertebrae, I found rib cage, and finally I found the skull. And it was this big skull with sharp teeth in it. And I took a lot of pictures and reached out to some, paleontology departments. And finally someone gave me what they thought it was. And it was a plesiosaur, definitely. And it was one of these short-necked plesiosaurs that, has a big head and jaws and stuff. So it was pretty cool to finally find something like that in person. You always see those in books and stuff like that. And everybody finds, invertebrates and shells and stuff, but to actually find an actual, and technically it's not a dinosaur because I guess there's no aquatic dinosaurs, but it was this, large aquatic lizard that was, probably 30 feet long, when it, during its lifetime, but now it's just a jumble of bones. But it was really fun to see that. So, what the, I think it was a professor at University of Alaska gave me an actual species name, and it was Brachauchenius. If you Google that, you can see it. And it kind of looks like one of those short-faced ones, has flippers. Not the long-necked plesiosaur, but one of the short-necked ones. And so that was probably my favorite outcrop and my favorite fossil was finding that in my thesis area and documenting.
That sounds awesome. Wow.
It was really cool. And the icing on the cake was because it was a anoxic environment or some kind of reducing environment in this, basically a source rock that it was buried in. It all the bones were blue. They'd been phosphatized. So we had an XRF scanner and we scanned this guy and it was like almost pure phosphate. Obviously there's a lot of calcite still in there, but they're just blue. It was strange. And so but digging into it a little bit, I found out that's actually a thing that happens in a certain environment, and the constituents of the bone get replaced and it turns this blue color. And so that was interesting too.
Wow, that's fascinating.
And you asked mineral, so I'll throw one more in there. So I don't know if you can see it on the screen very well, but if you look closely, what looks like a countertop here, these little quartz grains are actually blue here. And so this mineral here, the blue quartz, is lanite. So if you're ever in Llano, Texas, stop by, get some nice barbecue, and then you'll have to Google it. Head over to this, there's this volcanic dike that outcrops along this road, and you can go, and if you have a hammer, you can chisel off a piece of this, and it has this mineral called lanite, which is named for Llano, Texas. And because of some kind of inclusion in the quartz, it turns blue. And I forget exactly what it is, some kind of special clay inclusion that got stuck in there. It turns blue. And so I've always had this on my desk, probably since I was a grad student. And so that's probably my favorite mineral.
That's a great one. Sweet. Look that up. Awesome. And so when you're not eating barbecue and looking at lanite, what do you do for fun? What keeps you entertained?
All right, we're in Denver, so I like to ski and mountain bike. So I've got my kids are old enough, at least my 2 older kids, they can ski. And so we go out, and I guess one of the benefits of working with the government is you're limited on the hours you can work. So pretty much every Friday during the winter, I'll take them out and we'll go skiing. And obviously there's a lot of opportunities to do other outdoor stuff. So mostly just outdoor activities with my family. We try to do that as much as we can.
Cool. Yeah. It's a great place to live for those kind of activities. So that's really
for
cool.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, so on October 29th, what can we expect from what can our audience expect from your talk? What are you going to be talking to us about?
Yeah, man, I've got an exciting project I've been working on in conjunction with the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. And so what I've done is built a basin model in the Denver Basin that basically we want to assess the geothermal potential of this basin. Not only because it's obviously located, under Denver, and there's, potentially a lot of people that could use the geothermal energy, but it's also a very petroliferous basin. So there's already a bunch of wells in the basin. There's a lot of infrastructure, potentially, and some places that have been doing this, they can run some of the equipment on the pad or on the field based off of the geothermal energy they produce. And so I put together this, what is a 3D basin model, using Petromod that you typically do for an oil and gas kind of exploration, but we're reapplying that for geothermal. And so we're working with the Denver Museum because those guys have done some really detailed paleogeographic maps over the region. And to really have a nice calibrated basin model, you want to have a good handle on the lithology. And so by using their maps and, something like 40,000 bottom hole temperature measurements, we can come up with a really accurate 3D temperature model so that we have a really good idea of where the geothermal potential is in the basin. And so I'll walk through the methodology I use to create this model, and there'll be some discussion on the implications.
Oh, wow, fantastic. Well, we're really looking forward to that. Remember, October 29th, it's a Tuesday, 11:30, Wind Coop. Be there in person, be there online, just be there. Rand, thanks so much for talking with me today. It was a real pleasure getting to know you, and looking forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.